from Wakefield, it's the Nolan Carter Night Show, inviting you to join Nolan and his guest this week, Grammy-nominated musician Alex Salzman, to the show. And now, ladies and gentlemen, here's Nolan.
And welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to another edition of the show. And I hope you enjoyed last week's episode. And certainly, if you enjoyed it, do us a favor, subscribe, comment, share all that fun jazz, and follow on social media for all news and updates regarding past episodes as well as future ones as well. But nevertheless, this week we have an amazing episode, an amazing guest this week. And I'm so honored and privileged to have this. I'm sure I'll say it a few times, so I'll try my best to refrain from repeating that time and time again. But this guest certainly fits that bill. Although, like four group mopheads named after a bug sang back in the USSR, which is where his story started after traveling across Atlantic to Lady Liberty, is where I guess this week began his journey of success and fame when he's not wailing away with wondrous rhythms on his guitar or investigating interesting idiosyncrasies on the ivories. Alex Salzman has done it all. Not only is Alex a Grammy Award-nominated engineer and producer, but he has also worked with the likes of Jana Mushini, Arlen Roth, and most famously with the original spaceman Ace Frehley. It is my highest honor and privilege to welcome Alex Salzman on as my guest this week. Alex, how are you today?
I am doing well. Thank you for having me, and it's a pleasure to be here.
Well, it's always a treat because there's so many people out there who have found success, however you want to define it, and however you want to get to it. So to be able to speak to someone like yourself is a great pleasure and shows the decency that you have. So thanks again. A few weeks ago, or about a month ago, I had a guy on named Terry Manning, who similar path as yourself, who had worked with Led Zeppelin on their third album, ZZ Top on Trace Hombres and Eliminator, some successful stuff. And we sort of talked about how it's been for him post 3 years of the last couple of years, and how it's been to see not just live music but working in the studio again with musicians and things of nature. So from your perspective, what's it like, not just as a consumer of music but as someone who helps create music, to see music enjoyed again so much personally and in public?
Well, I think what the last 3 years have taught us all, after spending a lifetime at it, is how important music really is. I think people have got into a thing during this pandemic where everything has stopped, and certainly it stopped for the music business. But one silver lining, I think, for everybody, and I can speak for many of my colleagues, is that when the music was able to be played again, and specifically live, people have gravitated towards it more than they were before. I remember doing my first live show after a year and a half lockout, and I think it was a large industrial or corporate event. And just the look on people's faces by seeing live music and listening to whatever it was just, it was a different thing.
Sure.
Maybe I didn't notice it before, playing, everywhere, all over the place in my life, but maybe got used to it and kind of took it for granted. But I think one revelation is how important music is to our lifestyle. And it doesn't matter what music you listen to, it's part of our life, and how important. And I'm hoping that general consumer have gained a higher, value to musicians and people everybody around the music business, from musicians to producers to promoters to engineers to everybody who's involved in making the music and bringing it to the masses. So I think that's one big revelation that I've gotten for the past 3 years.
Now, hopefully, during the last few years, we've all learned something about ourselves that I didn't know prior. So, for Alex, what did he learn about himself that he didn't know prior?
Uh, I don't know if I learned anything about myself. I think I've certainly learned about other people. I don't think my approach has ever really changed. I always lived in this world for as long as I remember. And if anything, it just taught me how volatile we are, how dependent on society we all are. We're not sole individual. We're not meant to be alone. We're meant to share what we have with other people. I think that's probably one thing that I've learned, being somewhat of a solitary creature at times. So I think that's the one big revelation.
Well, that's something bad. It's always good to have that perspective on life. Now, I know, and thankfully to the lucky information I read in doing research on your own website, growing up in a very music infused household, both artists and musicians. So for you, growing up, how much of an influence did that have in terms of your hopes and dreams of once you got older to do something professionally?
I had everything to do with it. I really, I could have chosen different paths. I mean, I have a business degree that, whatever, on top of the music degree and all that other stuff. I mean, it helped me through life, but I think being basically growing up under a grand piano, and my mother was a concert pianist, and it was really nothing else that I could possibly have gone into. My father's an artist, and I dabbled in art as well, but I thought music was always something I gravitated to. So when it came time to make decisions on career, there's probably no other
Yeah.
consideration. Even when I went to college for business, I was playing in a band 4 nights a week, and just the way it was. And there was
Sure.
really never any doubt. And of course, like I can probably speak for pretty much everybody that's in this business. We always go through doubt. There are always times where we're not working or we're not doing what we love. Sometimes there's always this, oh, you know what, I had enough, screw it, I can do something else.
Sure.
And then in the next hour or so, maybe the next day or so, you come back, yeah, this is what I'm really supposed to be doing. When you hear a finished product, a mix, or do a great show, all that goes away. So
Now,
it's
now,
just the nature of it. So
I find that funny how on your bio as well mentioned, you found the Beatles 11 years old and you asked your mom if you could study guitar and that stuff. And she said, only if you continue your piano studies and that sort of stuff. So for you, going through that through a few years, learning all the aspects, the in outs, the nick and crannies of piano and reading charts and all that stuff and hearing by ear and all that stuff, to then suddenly go through all that, to know that type of music, to then find the Beatles and find music like that and play guitar. How rewarding and freeing was that after everything you went through for music?
it was just a complete, eye-opening thing. And considering the fact that I grew up at the time, I was living in the Soviet Union, so we were very limited to what we were able to access. But because of my contact with the West or my mother, we were able to get some records and tapes, reel-to-reel tapes, cassettes, and bootleg 10 times over. So it was a completely different thing, and everything about that type of music, whether it's the Beatles or the Stones, it was just this is music for me. I mean, not that classical wasn't something that I loved at the time, but it was, for a 10, 11-year-old kid, when you hear something with a beat that's got 4 chords in it and it speaks to you, it's a whole different thing. So, and that kind of set the path for me to go into the popular music. And I continued my studies for a while, but, after a while, it was just like,
Yeah.
I need to do one thing, and I'm never going to be Van Cliburn or, Leonard Bernstein or somebody like that. And then I never had the notion to be, but I wanted to be Paul McCartney or John Lennon, but,
I know you went to college over here and went Fordham and another
Mhm.
school as well, according to your website. Compared to the conservatory school back over in Russia, what was that like going to not just music school, but college here in the United States?
It's really hard to compare, because when I went to school, I was a kid,
Yeah,
from 6 to 12, 13, whatever it was. Here, I was already somewhat of a, kind of a formed being, even though, I had to adapt to, culture here, which happened very quickly. Um, I mean, it was different in a way. It was probably a little bit less structured,
sure.
and not to say anything good or bad, it's a different thing. But I mean, a business school is supposed to be a little more structured, I guess, but I don't know. It was when the music part of it in the Westchester Conservatory was way less structured. I mean, it
Yeah,
was a little bit almost like a free-for-all thing, but I got what I needed out of it.
sure.
I had a great refresher course, and I met some great people. So, um, had I gone to Berkeley or something like that, that would have been a completely different thing, but it didn't happen. So.
I know that you got signed early on as a songwriter, but also performer. I know Geffen Records and Warner Chappell Publishing. You signed with them early on in your career. Getting something like that, even if you're not the number one person there, for you at that point in your career, was that a moment where you thought to yourself it was the first time you sort of, I don't want to say made it, but sort of realized that you're on the right path and that you're in the right vicinity of what you want to do?
Without a doubt, yeah. Um, it was the moment that you realize you possibly are getting close to that level you've been working towards
Yeah,
for whatever. I don't know. I don't want to say lifetime, because we don't really realize what we really want to do until
yeah,
we're a little bit more formed as a person. Uh, yeah, that was a moment where we said, well, that's something that's possibly going to happen, but with caution.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, in that aspect, though, getting signed to those two places, how much were you thinking of what this could lead to, but also what you would be able to do in terms of creatively speaking?
As far as our relationship with Geffen, getting
Well,
signed, is that
yeah,
what you're
yeah.
asking? Yeah. Well, I mean, I'm not sure what I really thought. I don't really remember. I mean, it was, we were happy. We were recording our album. They were paying us. I was doing development demos for them. We were writing songs. And I guess we all had kind of a, hey, this is going to happen and we're going to have a record out on Geffen and, we'll see what happens from there. So,
Something that you share with Ace, which we'll talk about momentarily, is being
mhm,
able to be really pretty good with technology in terms of in the studio. And I know
mhm,
he's really proficient with Pro Tools as well as yourself.
mhm,
When that technology was starting to come into the music business foray and being able to, the only option to use since time's moving forward always,
mhm.
and you were able to jump right into that and be good with that, what was that like in terms of career prospects to be so good at something like that early on when it was out there?
It was essential. When we were recording our album for Geffen and doing demos, I was doing everything. I mean, and it kind of launched my career as a producer, engineer. We were doing it to tape, and I had tape machines, and was getting into learning and reading, and obviously we didn't have YouTube back then, so I had to learn from books and other people, and other session engineers. Um, when that band disbanded, I was asked by quite a few other local musicians to start producing their stuff. And that was about the time where technology really started, evolving. And I was, excuse me, I was able to jump on it like really early.
Sure.
I got into it. I got into digital recording really early in the game. I got into sampling early in the game. I was one of the first guys in the New York area to actually use live samples
Okay.
for live shows, for background vocals and effects and things like that. There's only a couple of guys in the area that did it. So I was able to jump on that technology. And when it came to studio digital stuff, like I said, I was able to jump in and get an early start on it. And that really completely changed
Sure.
everything, I basically went from being, a keyboard guitarist, songwriter into an engineer producer, not because I just able, like today you get a laptop and comes preloaded with everything in there. And I learned
Sure.
from cutting tape. I learned from using mixers. I learned from using outboard stuff. So the transition was really easy because I was already computer savvy at the time.
Now,
And it really opened up all the doors because I was able to do other work that other guys couldn't do. They
yeah,
didn't know how, doing editing, doing sweetening, and doing things, that normally are not able to be done in analog recording.
we're talking about somebody you worked with later on who had success, but you worked with another guy who you had equally great success with, a guy named Alan Menken. People may know who that man is and some of the things he might have worked on a few low budget Disney films, I believe. For you in that aspect, we just talked about the technology advances in the music studio, but working with somebody like him on the projects that you were part of, the sessions that became historically relevant for the remainder of Earth's existence, what was that like for you, seeing as that's maybe a different avenue in music that you were used to?
Um, well, first of all, I think going back to technology, one of the reasons I was able to work with Alan is because I knew the technology.
Yeah,
And he was comfortable with me running his studio and helping him, record. Um, he's really good at it right now
sure.
himself. By now, he's great. Probably better than me at some of the stuff that he does. Different software, but I was always, sometimes still support him. It was humbling to a certain extent, and just being exposed to that other world. It wasn't terribly new to me because I knew musical theater. I'm a fan of, you know, mid-century American productions and the great songwriters, and Rodgers and Hammerstein and all those type things. And I put Alan with that, bunch, no doubt. So making music is making music. So it wasn't a huge challenge for me. The challenge was dealing with some personalities. Okay, it is, because when you get to that top level, there are certain people that are amazingly great to work with, totally humble, but there's some that are not as much. And that's just, you learn that goes everywhere. But when you do get to that level, you kind of have to be a bit more careful on how you approach things and what your place is. But I am grateful for that relationship. It opened a ton of doors for me, and we're still friends. So.
Sure. Was there a session? Maybe it's been so long that they sort of all blended to one. But do you have a session that was most memorable for you that you remember with him?
Actually, I do. We were doing a re-record of Little Shop of Horrors, which was his huge big hit, and they were doing I don't remember the purpose of it, but we needed to re-record the score in a demo form. So it wasn't a full orchestra. It was basically computer MIDI stuff, pianos and things like that. And we needed to record 5 singers doing parts. Now, Alan's has a beautiful studio, not too far from me, but he's not really set up to do a lot of live recording. So his live booth is rather small. 2 people may be comfortable, 3 pushing it, 5 tight. So I stuck 5 people, and they weren't just people. These were Broadway performers. These were people who have done it all. There was a couple of pretty famous ones in there, and they're all incredibly cool. There was never an issue, but trying to stuff them into the small booth was a little bit of a challenge. And I ended up splitting 1 or 2 actually in the machine room when we had a couple of old machines stacked. Those on the other side of the studio. We had to run some cables, but it was funny having all these people stuck in a little booth. I see them in the glass, and it turned out great. I mean, it was fine, but we still laugh about it to this day. Of course, Alan commented on how it potentially would smell when we'd open the door, and it wasn't bad, but so that's it. I mean, there were a lot of other things, but I think that one comes to mind from the technical aspect.
Now, I'll get to the point later of moving up in the studio world. There was another little project you worked on called Kid Riffs, which was a video game which had critical success around the world. Working in a scenario where working scores for Disney films, wherever the case may be, working on your own stuff for independent musicians or bands and stuff, to then working on a video game and creating stuff for that. In terms of challenges, where does that rank in the list of things you went through musically?
The Kid Riff thing was an interesting thing. It was devised and developed by the famed IBM Watson Research Center, which are the guys are in there. They're the brainiest people on the planet. They're really pretty amazing. And funny enough, they're all musicians, because computers and coding and all that, it goes along. Math and music just work.
Sure.
So I have a friend who was the director of the whole program, and he just hired me to do some music. And he said, "Oh, we're working on something a little bit. Can you write for us little snippets, little 30-second, 1-minute things?" And at that time, I was doing a lot of jingles. So the 30-second to 1-minute thing wasn't really new to me. Rather than writing a 3-4 minute song, believe me, writing a 30-second jingle is a lot harder than to write a 4-minute song, because you have to say everything in 30 seconds. You don't have time to develop. So it wasn't new to me. So I did a bunch of things, and one thing led to another, and I get called into this hush meeting after signing a bunch of NDAs. Like, we're working on something really terrific, and I would like to use your music, and I would like you to write some more. And they just ended up being Kid Riffs. So my involvement was completely as a composer. I had nothing to do with technology. It wasn't really even accessible to me at the time. But I guess they did really well with it. I'm not sure if they made any money on it, but it wasn't meant for that.
Sure.
I think the biggest payoff when me and my wife went to, I guess she was girlfriend at the time. No, she was a wife already. We went to Disney World, and Epcot had a pavilion where the game was prominently displayed, and I was like, "What?" So that was great. It was a payoff. Yeah.
Sure. A moment where you appreciate the hard work and the trials and tribulations through the whole process of creating 30-second to a minute songs. Now, mentioning Alan, the other things you were part of that brought success. About 15 years ago, as I said, you met this little independent garage band musician called Ace Frehley out of New York. You come on along on the first album you worked with him halfway through to help finish it. A story I heard you talked about in another interview a few years ago when Origins Volume 2 came out. You talked about how you always would see him at a record store, and then how one day when you worked with him, he said, "Oh, I remember you from that record store, seeing you going in there from time to time." So for you, experiencing that, seeing him there, and then randomly coming to be able to work on that second half of that album, how much of a full circle moment was that for you? But also a moment where you're like, how in the hell did I end up here working with Ace Frehley?
It was actually a music store. I worked in a music store in my college years, and sometimes beyond that. I worked at Sam Ash for quite a few years, but this was even before that. Um, it was interesting. I'm not sure what my reaction was. I mean, Ace is a pretty well-known person
Sure.
in this area because he's from here. He is now back living in this area. So it was I don't know if it was shocking to me, but it was certainly I put a smirk on my face and had a, it was funny. And he actually told other people, hey, guess who I'm working with? It's Alex. Remember Alex from Ronan's Music? And of course, I know everybody in the area. Everybody knows me. All the so it was kind of interesting. So I guess it was cool. Yeah.
In the same interview I just mentioned about when you saw him in the store, you also mentioned how you weren't really you recognized Kiss's relevance in society music as well, but you weren't a fan of them compared to Deep Purple, Led Zeppelin, and even Genesis, which you previously mentioned. Seeing as you weren't a fan of the music, did that help you more than maybe if you were a fan of the music when you started working with Ace, or was it a completely different thing?
You know what? We actually discussed it years later into our relationship, and I confided in him and said, "Look, I was never a huge Kiss fan." He goes, "I know," but I said, "Of course, I know all the hits and all the
Yeah,
songs, but if you asked me to tell you every song that's been recorded, no, I wouldn't be able to tell you that." And I think it was actually it was a plus because by the time I was involved in more than just being engineer and became a co-producer, it was a good thing because I could look at it from a fresher standpoint. And we were never going to make another Destroyer. We're never going to make the first solo album because that's not what we were going
sure.
for. So me being somewhat detached from it and not always thinking, oh, well, how would you have played it on Cold Gin? If you
Yeah,
played it on Cold Gin, how can you play it the same thing? I never referenced that.
sure.
And I think thinking about it years later, I think it was actually positive rather than negative.
Well, I wanted to mention that process because it had been 20 years since his prior solo studio release. Obviously, 78 was his face with the space makeup on, and 78. Then about 11 years later, then 20 years after that was when Anomaly came out. Even though you weren't there from the beginning, you came in halfway. How cautious were you with this, seeing as it was a big occasion since it had been 20 years since his first release or second release?
Um, Honestly, I don't think I understood at the time the gravity and the importance of making this record right. I mean, by that time, I already worked with some heavier people, like Alan, for instance. I mean, these
Yeah,
people are at the top of the food chain. So it wasn't like a big thing for me. Yeah, of course, Ace, everybody knows him, and he's a personality like nobody else.
yeah,
But I don't know if it was ever, consciously I realized that this has to be absolutely successful because
sure.
I approach every project exactly the same way, whether it's an independent artist with his first EP release or it's Ace Frehley's sixth record with me, fifth record or whatever. I would approach it exactly the same. It has to be great.
Yeah.
It has to be great. I will give you my 150% to make it great. Um, and sometimes stuff is not great because it's not my fault because the songs are bad. Well, that wasn't the case with him, obviously.
Sure.
So there was never, maybe in hindsight, there was a little bit of more of a pressure because it was our first project together. But we happened to hit it off very early, very quickly. And I gained his trust by doing what I was hired to do. And it was basically, that's why the whole thing worked out.
Well, I know for you, you like to get it right the first time. So I'm sure to an extent doing that, having that mindset and that goal and that vision to get it right the first time, but also not wanting to screw the opportunity up, because if you mess up, then you might not be
Sure.
able to work with him on five or four other ones besides
And
that one.
besides that, not to interrupt you, besides that, in this business, if you do something bad, purposely or not, the word gets around.
Sure, yeah,
Reputation is everything in this
sure.
business.
And you're
You
always,
know,
I'm sure, looking for the next project as well. So if you don't
always,
have that option, then you're gonna have to
always.
be working at the next door 7-Eleven.
Yeah.
Each album you worked with them, it's had great critical success on top of the charts, not just in the United States but overseas as well as the independent charts. And each album you sort of moved your way up sort of the ladder from just musician or engineer to then co-producer on it, especially the last one, Origins Volume 2. How important is it for you working, or was it working with you to make sure, or not make sure, but help Ace create something that was as successful that it was, or is that something that's just a byproduct of the work you put in?
Um, I don't think we have a conscious approach to I have to make this better than the next thing. It has to be different. Yes, of course, you want it to be good. But with Ace, he has such a huge following that,
Sure.
really, well, one way you can think about it, yeah, anything he puts out is going to sell it because he's got this huge following. But I mean, if he farts something out, it's bad, it's going to get around.
Sure.
There's always going to be haters. There's always going to be lovers, and there's always going to be people they're going to completely protect them from everything, and there's going to be people who's going to crap on everything he does. So quality, consistency is really what it's about. Trying to outdo a classic record, probably never going to happen.
Sure.
Think of any artist that did a classic record that will stay for generations in the heyday of their careers. Having to come back and try to top it is virtually impossible.
Sure.
There are certain instances, but you can probably count them on your 10 fingers.
Now, with an album like Origins Volume 1 or Volume 2, with some of rock's greatest songs ever that he's covered on there, along with other musical guests on there,
Mhm.
as fans, we all know what the original sound is like for the song, but then also now it's Ace or somebody else coming in to do their version of it. How careful are you with that process? Because obviously you want to bring the original sound, but also your own spin on it. Is that a big challenge, or is that something that came easy to you guys?
Honestly, it was pretty easy because anything he puts his guitar on and plays on anything, it's going to be aceified. That's
Sure.
that's the word we use. We're going to aceify it. So when we do a Beatles song, it's aceified. We do a King song, it's aceified. He has a certain style, has a certain approach. Those two records were incredibly fun to make because, it's different from having to write
Sure.
original material. It's so much harder to do it. So picking out the songs that influenced your playing, your career, your life is a joy. And for both records, we went through tons of material.
Sure.
Because he is an avid music fan back then, as we all were.
Yeah.
So his choice of music was huge. So it was fun picking out certain things. And we tried to record a couple of things. We rejected them because they just weren't working. But all in all, it was just, this is what I love. I love this song. We can aceify it, and who we're going to get to guests on it. That was the biggest thing. Who can sing this? Who is going to play guitar on that? Who do we want to bring? Who do you want to bring in? So that was probably the most fun I had on all the records.
Now, I don't know about Bruce Kulick working with Ace. I don't know if they're there at the same time in Kiss, but on Origins Volume 2 and Spaceman and Origins Volume 1, he returns to working with his former collaborators. He even co-wrote with Gene to experience that, seeing as you weren't a fan of the group, but experiencing him turning back the clock and working with his former bandmates. What was that like as a music fan?
I thought it was refreshing,
Yeah.
knowing the feuds that happened in that band for 40 years. And they come and go, they connect, and if you remember on the Origins one, we had Paul Stanley
Yeah.
doing a song with them. So the next record, he got Gene to co-write and play bass on a couple of songs. I think it was great. It was kind of a good feeling.
Sure.
Sadly, I wasn't there for the Gene Simmons sessions. They wrote it, there were just the two of them, and I was on another project, but I literally came in 2 days. Ace lived in California at the time. I came in a couple of days afterwards. It was cool. I think it was. I was hoping that would lead to a more amicable relationship from
Sure.
there on. But you know, I that's all I have to say about that.
He obviously has a close relationship with Peter Criss as well. And there was a video I saw recently. He was playing with Peter. Peter was singing not Hot Legs. I'm forgetting what the song was.
Hmm?
Did he ever, when you were working with Ace on any of his albums, did he ever want to work with Peter on any of his stuff?
Yes, we actually we were trying to put something together for Orange 2, but sadly, things just didn't work out for a couple of different reasons. Nothing personal. There was none of that.
Yeah.
But maybe on the next one.
Sure, yeah, and and
Yeah,
and,
yeah,
and then for Peter, and I know he's retired from playing, so it's
yeah.
always good to see. He's
Hmm.
now off the road and he's now enjoying life, whatever he may be
Hmm.
enjoying with his wife and so
Hmm.
forth. And he's always going to be the cat man to everyone out there. So it's
Always is a
always
cat man. Yeah.
entertaining now.
Hmm.
Unfortunately, there's only been a few people in life who have found that the secret to immortality, besides Keith Richards, Mick Jagger, Steven Tyler, and Brian Wilson. Of course, with Ace recently turning 72 a few months ago, what do you hope to achieve with his next solo record if you're able to work on it with him?
Well, actually, he's working on it. I'm not involved in it at this point. He's writing for new material. I just hope he keeps going
Sure,
because if he's got something to say, he should say it, and people want to hear stuff from him.
sure.
He's an icon. I think the generation that he grew up with, sadly, I don't want to use the word dying out, but it's going, we're getting
Yes,
older. But when I go to see shows, there's a lot of
sure,
younger kids there, whether it's they're with their parents or whatever on themselves. He attracts not only Kiss fans, but just guitar players
sure.
because he was such a, influence on so many people. I mean,
Yeah.
huge artists and everyday, bedroom players. So
Well, how many people do you see? How many musicians like Ace do you see shooting pyrotechnics out their guitar um, for many years? None. And you can't
no,
think of any besides Ace, which
no,
which
no,
makes it
he was, yeah.
which makes him unique and in a party of one a rare breed. I want to end with this question before I sign off and we do a quick little game. No one, of course, we just said immortality and all those things and dying and all this stuff, but and I'm sure you're not going to retire anytime soon from the music business. But when the lights turn off, the studio's locked, the boards are unplugged. What do you hope the musical legacy or image is left behind for yourself?
I made a difference. And honestly, here's the thing with me. This is something that I always think about. Working with prominent names is a great career move. This is how we get further in life.
Yeah,
Um, you get credit, you meet other people, uh, and that's all fine and good. I think the payback comes to me is when somebody who's unknown starts getting traction from, not from working with me, but I helped this person get to the
sure.
next level. I made a difference. And as simple as people just calling me, just saying, hey, I just played this record for my family that we did 2 months ago, and they're all crying
Yeah,
because they think it's so amazing because I poured my heart out about things I wanted to say and I couldn't say it because I could say it in my music.
sure,
That's a lot of times is more payoff than having a Billboard record.
sure.
Definitely not financially, but certainly emotionally. But what people remember before, just being a professional, being a
Sure,
solid professional. I don't want to say the real deal because nobody is the real deal.
sure.
There's a real deal that's better than you, but I certainly I've always tried to be true to what I do and basically just project that to other people that I work with. So
Well, and if someone likes an album 40 years ago, no one's gonna 40 years later, no one's gonna care where it charted, but they're gonna care more of how it meant to them and the influence it had
absolutely,
internally and
absolutely, yeah,
emotionally to
yeah.
them. Before we end, again, Alex, thank you so much for doing this. I want to end on a little game called the One Word Challenge. So what entails of this is I'll throw out a few names of people, places,
Mm-hmm.
or things that have some connection to my guest, and then to do the rest to say a word or two or a sentence that comes to mind when they hear it. So are you ready?
Yes.
Uh, Moscow.
Beautiful city. Poor people in a way. They live in a society that they do not deserve, or maybe they do deserve.
Los Angeles.
Eh, plastic
Hard work.
every day.
Success.
Only measured by what you consider to be success.
Ace Frehley.
The spaceman.
And last but certainly never least, in this cosmic universe we all live in called Earth, Alex Salzman.
Some guy plays music.
Well, we all hope to have an image like that, where we're just a simple man who plays music. Well, Alex, I want to say again, this was a great treat for me to hear your stories and what it's like to work with the original and only true spaceman Ace Frehley.
Thanks, man. Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. I hope I have given you some information that your listeners will digest.
Sure. Where can people find you? Where can people find updates regarding things you're working on and things of that nature?
You can go to my website, which is alexsalzman.com. I'm on Facebook as Alex Salzman1 and on Instagram as Alex Salzman Music Producer. I don't spend a lot of time on social media, but anything that is worth posting, you will find it there, mostly on Facebook.
Well, next time you work with the spaceman, and whenever it comes out, whatever the case may be, we'll have to do this again and talk about the next album.
I look forward to it.
Well, if you enjoy this, because who the hell went down the line when my guest is inducted into the New York Music Hall of Fame, you can say, holy crap, I should subscribe. So subscribe, comment, share, all the typical fun stuff you do to help continue the growth of the show. Follow on social media, Twitter, Nolan Card Night, and Instagram, the Nolan Cart Night Show. In the words of Johnny Carson, the Dean of Talk Shows, just like this one, I bid you all a health, vote, good night, till next time.